Okay, we're good to go? Great. Okay, so thanks for the introduction, Maxwell. Like you've already said, my name's Amy Whitehead, and I work with Laura Swettenham, who Laura's been kind of one of my students. She's now graduated, and we're doing a lot of work together on the use of Think Aloud as a coach development tool, but also kind of hopefully from this presentation, you'll see the multiple kind of spin-offs. And I'll mention briefly some of the other areas that we work in as well. So what I'll do is I'll introduce the concept of Think Aloud, the method, and then I'll pass over to Laura and she'll talk you through a recent project that we've just done in football, where she's used Think Aloud as a coach development tool, and she'll talk you through the outcomes of that project. Think Aloud kind of traditionally, and I'll come to this again in a second, but Think Aloud traditionally is used as a tool to capture cognitive processes within people, participants, and it comes from cognitive psychology. But I've used it a lot within athletes to understand how athletes think and process and kind of make decisions. But more recently, kind of in the last 5 or 6 years, we've applied this to coaching, and we've looked at how Think Aloud can be used to facilitate reflective practice. Now, it's really important that we consider kind of what reflective practice is, and I do a lot of work with and for bases, and I always go back to this reflective practice statement about the idea of questioning our whole self, kind of developing this knowledge in action and improving our practice in the situation. So for me, the really important element is that reflective practice should be based in the action, or part of it should be based in the action, and we should encourage coaches to think about how we reflect within the situation in which your job and your actions occur. And the reason I think this is important for us to think about is because, and I always kind of lean or borrow kind of this concept of experiencing self and remembering self from Daniel Kahneman's work. So he talks a lot about kind of how we experience an event might be very different to how we remember it. So even from the work I do with athletes, when we look at kind of what do athletes think about during an event, and we ask them to recall also, you know, what did they think about when we ask them afterwards, there's very different responses that we get when we compare the in-event Think Aloud data to the retrospective interviews. And similarly with reflective practice and coaching, what we might reflect on might be different to kind of what we actually experienced. And a lot of the times what we remember are very much around how we feel at the end of an event and maybe some critical moments during the event. And we tend to lose quite a lot of information or memories. Kahneman talks about this kind of, we decide what to keep and what not to keep. So if we look at coach education and we look at how kind of reflective practice traditionally has been promoted within coach education, it's always after the event, it's always reflective diaries, it's always journaling, it might be coach conversations, but again, it always tends to be promoted to be a kind of a retrospective process or retrospective activity. And for me, this becomes a little bit of an issue if we don't also think about the reflection in action. And this is where Think Aloud comes in. So as I've kind of mentioned really briefly there, Think Aloud is, or traditionally has been used within cognitive psychology to look at how people make decisions, how people solve problems. It's very simple. It's where we put like a clip mic, a dictaphone, or with the coaches that we work with, they might use their iPhone, their mobile phones and their headphones, but we just ask people to think aloud, to verbalize anything that comes to mind. Now, within the context of coaching, what we also do is we add another kind of question or another layer, and we ask the coaches to verbalize what they're thinking where they can, but then we ask them to kind of step back and think about and reflect on these kind of thoughts and these coaching behaviors. So again, Think Aloud is verbalizing your thoughts out loud, but again, from a coaching perspective, we want to promote this thinking about thinking. We want to make coaches aware of their thoughts, of their coaching processes, And we want to be able to help them to capture these experiences and add them to the memories so that their reflections are more kind of fruitful, more deep. And also, I think a lot of coaches kind of, or a lot of people in general, we have bad habits that we might not be necessarily aware of. So it's hoped that by using Think Aloud, we can bring these kind of bad habits and these, not just bad habits, but all habits that we might kind of, it might be in our subconscious, and bring that to the conscious. So sometimes it might stop us ignoring things that we would rather kind of forget or we ignore. And just to kind of give you a really quick overview of some of the past work that we've done, I kind of piloted this Think Aloud program, or Think Aloud as a reflective practice tool, back in kind of 2014-15. And we worked with a group of coaches in rugby league, and we looked at whether Think Aloud could be used as a positive or useful reflective practice tool. And then we've developed this work over the last 5 or 6 years, and I now run kind of Think Aloud programs with different groups of coaches, different sports, different organisations. But these earlier papers just kind of give you an idea of what we found from that work, which kind of Laura will touch on next. But here's just a kind of a framework or an idea of what the Think Aloud program looks like. And it's initially we introduce coaches to Think Aloud, which is a little bit similar to what we're doing here, but then we take them through some Think Aloud exercises where we get them used to it. Because you can probably imagine that actually thinking aloud and introducing Think Aloud to a group of coaches that have never come across this concept before could be quite nerve-wracking, could be quite daunting. Most of the coaches that I do work with are aware of Think Aloud before they kind of come to the workshop, so they're kind of prepared to engage in something that can be quite a vulnerable process. And then what we do is we hand over a clip mic and a dictaphone to the coaches, and we get them to practice using Think Aloud within their natural coaching setting. We then ask them, where possible, to listen back, and kind of we give them a set of questions, like reflective questions. So what, now, so what, and now what, to kind of frame what they're listening to, their initial reflections. So what we're doing there is we're promoting reflection in action by using Think Aloud, and then reflection on action by getting them to listen back. And then we get them to come back into a workshop and kind of engage in some shared reflection as a group of coaches.
Thanks, Amy. I'll take over now and just speak a little bit more about our most recent study, which is in press at the moment. So hopefully you guys can have a look at that soon. So what we intended to do initially was to use the framework that Amy just showed with football academy coaches. But unfortunately, like with probably a lot of research that was going on around this time last year, COVID hit in the middle. So we'd only just really got through our introductory phase, and the coaches had a few opportunities to practice Think Aloud whilst they were coaching. Excuse me. What we did then was we interviewed them just to get their initial perspectives on how they thought Think Aloud could be used as a reflective tool to help them to develop. So what we then found from these interviews was that the coaches are all talking about the 3 different types of knowledge within coaching. So professional, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. So this kind of quote here from Coates Gilbert is kind of talking about coaching expertise, coaching effectiveness, and saying how it's the consistent application of integrated professional, interpersonal, and intrapersonal knowledge to improve athletes' competence, confidence, connection, and character in specific coaching contexts. So we can see how these 3 types of knowledge, or the triad of knowledge, is quite a foundational aspect really to developing this coaching effectiveness. So just to provide some quick examples for those types of knowledge. So professional knowledge being knowledge of one's sport and how to apply it. So this might be your technical and tactical knowledge. Then the interpersonal, so our ability to connect and communicate with athletes and stakeholders, but then also our coaching peers as well. And then finally, intrapersonal. So this is more of the reflection side of it. So the kind of self-awareness and introspection, kind of knowledge about themselves that the coach might have. So Then when we were sorting out our interviews into themes and seeing what was coming up, when we asked the coaches how they felt Think Aloud could benefit their coaching, we kind of split them into these primary themes and the secondary themes. So I'll just read through these quickly now. So in professional knowledge, we had kind of player development. So the coach was talking about how the impact of that Think Aloud could impact how the coaches then support the players to develop. So for example, this might be providing individualized support. And then secondly, you have session design. So the impact of Think Aloud on the coach's ability to plan and adapt their coaching sessions. So this is something I think which is great in Think Aloud, is that of course it's in action. So if maybe something isn't quite working, the coach can adapt this as they're going. So maybe they need to make the space bigger or smaller that the drill is kind of occurring within, for example. And then moving on to interpersonal, we have communication. So the impact of Think Aloud on the coach's use of language, maybe their tone of voice, the clarity of the messages they're giving. A lot of the coaches spoke about, how much time is the ball rolling? How much time are we talking? And then we have relationships. So here, interestingly, sorry, I have such a bad cough right now for some reason. So here, interestingly, the coaches were talking more about relationships between their coaching peers rather than, the relationship with the players. So saying how actually if they have their Think Aloud audio and they share that with, say, for example, if they have a coaching partner or something, then they can start to understand better how one another works and what they're thinking whilst they're coaching. And moving on to intrapersonal, so we've got biases. So here, it kind of linking into what Amy was saying previously about the remembering self and the experiencing self. If, for example, we played a match and we lose 2-0, our remembering self might think, well, that was a terrible match. But actually, if we tap into our Think Aloud audio and really capture the experiencing self, we might see some more of the nuances and maybe the positive aspects of performance that happened during the match, even though there was a loss. And then self-awareness, so the impact of Think Aloud on the coach's consciousness, their own character, thoughts, feelings, behaviors. And then reflection, of course, so how Think Aloud can help the coach to have a more conscious analysis of their coaching experience. So I've got 2 quotes here now. I won't read them all out to you, I'll just give you a maybe like 30 seconds just to have a quick read. So these are some of the quotes that came from the interviews that we did. So of course, the top one here talking more about that communication aspect. So this coach was saying how he was using it to explore, what's the tone like? Are they being critical or are they being too positive, and trying to balance out kind of praise and things like that. And then the last one, I really like this one because this one's linking to session design, but it's saying how we're also looking at the good stuff. So I think sometimes it can be really easy just to look at what's going wrong and the negatives all the time. So here they're talking about, let's tap into the good things and maybe look at what's really well and what the players are responding to, as well as what we might need to change and adapt. So finally then here, where are we now with this? So in terms of work using Think Aloud with coaches. So as a sports psychologist, we might use Think Aloud as a needs analysis and a monitoring tool when working with a coach to help their development. But then of course the coach can take ownership over this on their own and use it more as their own personal reflective tool. So some things that have kind of come up with the coaches that I've been working with are more around the use of effective questioning, creating player ownership through autonomy support coaching. So for example, can we start to draw out instances of autonomy support coaching within Think Aloud audio and kind of monitor that over time? And training versus match day behaviors is quite a popular one. Obviously nice to see the differences between those 2 contexts. And also listing values in coaching philosophy. So is what you think your philosophy is congruent with what we're hearing on the Think Aloud audio. And then finally, Think Aloud for coach mentoring. So Amy's done a bit of work on this previously with football coach mentors. So the coach mentor would be doing the Think Aloud whilst they're watching another coach deliver a session. And this can then be used to help support coach development. And then potentially, as this paper we've just done is showing, can develop the triad knowledge within coaching too. So that's all from us. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Amy and Laura. That was really good. Is there any questions? If anybody has a question in mind, please don't be afraid to come on the mic and ask it.
Yeah, I have a question. Thanks, Amy and Laura. It was a very good presentation. Just a question for me. How long does it, I missed the start of the presentation, so maybe answer this, but how long would it take to train maybe a coach up to use Think Aloud? And what's the buy-in from the coaches like?
Sorry, David. This is a question we get all the time, and we also get asked, like, is there a set of instructions that can be used? I think so. That's something that we're actually developing at the minute, but my kind of short answer would be give a coach kind of a little bit of information prior to kind of a workshop. There are kind of blogs that we've done, and there's papers that we've got, and also I think once you explain the benefits of it, and like for us, I'm working a lot now in kind of professional football academies, and once they know that other academies are using it, the buy-in is pretty easy. But I do think my main advice would just be get them to have a go. So when me and Laura delivered this workshop, it was a very practical workshop. Traditionally, I've delivered kind of classroom sessions, and then I've sent the coaches away, but delivering a practical workshop where the coaches get to go and use it and with each other, I think was very helpful. So they kind of get over that. There is a very initial kind of, this is a weird thing to do, but once they get over that initial kind of first or second go, then it becomes much more comfortable. Would you agree, Laura?
Yeah, definitely. And I think just to add to that, I think some coaches can just naturally be more reflective, like anyway. And some coaches will say, "Oh yeah, I do this normally, like it's fine. It's just kind of getting used to, like you say, me saying it out loud." So I think as well, comfortable they feel with using Think Aloud as well.
Thank you.
Perfect. We've got time for one more quick question if someone's got one. I've got a question. It sounds like a really fantastic tool. I was wondering if you've experienced any, and I think David was kind of alluding to this, any pushback from coaches, and how you got over that, and also how their perception of it changed, or if it changed over time once they started using it.
Laura, do you want me to answer?
Yeah, you go for it.
I've only ever had one kind of, I call it a negative experience, when I was delivering a Think Aloud like workshop. And I think that was because the group of coaches that I was delivering to hadn't been prepped on what the topic on content of the workshop was. And it did come as a big surprise to them. But that was probably with one coach within that workshop, and then they didn't engage in the program. But usually, like we get asked to run this work and this workshop and program. So the coaches are kind of open to the development and the idea. So they're in a really good place to take on a new tool. So yeah, I'd say 99% of the time it's been absolutely fine. What I would say is that coaches will initially use it differently. So some coaches will find themselves maybe not thinking aloud as much as they could, and that does take a while of getting used to, whereas Laura said others are literally just constantly streaming verbalizations and they can't shut themselves up. So there is an element of individual differences for sure.
And I think just to add to that, and another challenge I've seen sometimes is the reluctance to then share their audio, say with the sports psych. And I think just recognizing that might happen, and obviously to give it time and just to build up trust with it as well. Of course, they can use it independently on their own, but yeah, just giving them time until they feel comfortable to share those things with the sports psych if they ever want to, because of course it can be quite a vulnerable thing to do.